Good vibes, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on another edition of Coach's Corner. Thanks for watching us on Twitch, the ESPN app, YouTube, and Twitter. This is where we talk to a coach from across esports, across multiple titles, and talk about how they bring their teams to success and also how they assess the ever-going changes that are happening across their titles. In the Call of Duty League, we are approaching champs. That is the playoffs. We have learned that this will be an all-online format. Lots to discuss in the league, including the most recent home series that is won by a new team, the New York Subliners. So we'll hear all about it from RamboRay, a two-time guest here on Coach's Corner. He is the coach and general manager of the Dallas Empire. Welcome back, Ray. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me again.
So this past weekend, lots to unpack with this past weekend. Of course, a major patch dropping in late June that seemed like at first it might change the meta. But when you watch the games this weekend, let's start there. What did you think of the game, in specifically not necessarily the teams themselves, but just the gameplay and the style of play that you saw? What did you make of it this past weekend?
Well, we saw the first thing that, it's kind of blatant obvious. We saw a lot more M4s, saw a lot more ARs than SMGs, and the pace of play didn't dramatically change, but it slowed down a little bit. So that's one of the things that we as a team are going to have to adapt moving forward. Not something we necessarily were looking forward to, but we got to adapt to the changes, got to make the best of what we learned from watching this weekend and implement that into our gameplay going next weekend, because obviously the gameplay and everything should be basically as similar as possible from what it was this weekend.
So from what you saw, assuming that that's going to continue, are you happy about this? Do you feel like it plays into the strengths of your team?
Our team's pretty good. I feel like our team's one of the more versatile teams out there, so it doesn't really, it doesn't worry me. The only thing that's kind of worrisome as a coach is the amount of time you have to adapt, and which is not a large amount of time. We kind of knew, and we've been practicing for this for 2 weeks now, so it's not like it's something that's just came out of nowhere to us. We're very aware of what's been going on. It's just kind of nice to see people play it out in the tournament, not being the test goats, I guess you can say, these guys trying to show that out for us. So we weren't the dummies to really kind of get matched in if we weren't really on par with the meta at the time. So yeah, it's good to know what we kind of have to expect for next weekend, and we can start organizing ourselves to looking forward to our matches coming up.
So let's talk about this weekend. Obviously, you were watching this weekend, as many of us were. You were watching it under the lens of course, your team will be participating in the next two home series. How will things shake down? It looked like, other than a couple series, Ray, it seemed like some pretty emphatic victories across the board. A lot of 3-0s, a lot of 3-1s. It seems like teams are really taking the bull by the horns, particularly New York. It really felt like they were a team that were due, or they were on the trajectory to win a tournament weekend. So when you look back on how they performed this weekend, especially against Chicago in the finals, does anything surprise you at all?
No. I feel like, New York, and I feel like Toronto as well kind of showed up this weekend and finally kind of put some height into their gameplay. Granted, they kind of came in a little lackluster in the semis, but just in general, it felt like New York obviously won, but New York's been kind of on that edge for a while now. They just haven't really been able to show up in a tournament. And I've been saying this for, maybe not 4 months, but I'd say about 6 weeks after I joined the Empire under coaching, I saw this team was probably one of the more improved teams during that time. And this is a month and a half ago. So I felt if anything, they're a little late to the party. But they showed what they have in store this weekend. And the changes that happened recently seems to be going into their kind of style of play. They're not, they have some fast-paced players, but they're kind of a methodical team that likes to play for map control, especially the coaching, JP and Brevin they have there are very kind of positional mind players. So they love to see their teams do things like that. And it feels like that kind of fell into place for them this weekend. And they just played extremely well to kind of encompass the changes that they made to really adapt to the meta. So I'd say Chicago and them were the two teams that seem to have adapted the best to the changes. And then New York just seemed to have the better day on Sunday. So that's kind of why they won.
It seems like a very new guard versus old guard discussion, right? If the beginning of the season was all about the top three teams, Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, now we're talking about New York, and now we're talking about Florida, at least interjecting them into the conversation. And even Toronto, like you said, a lot of emerging teams is what I'm trying to say here. So when you look at this weekend, particularly, let's focus on Atlanta, for example. They got 3-0'd out of the tournament from Chicago, but still from Chicago, and is the first time we saw them play this season. If you're Atlanta, are you concerned based on recent results, or do you think this is just a blip on the radar?
I feel like Atlanta's been kind of on and off as of late. They show up days where they're just like themselves and they just play really well and everything kind of goes to what's according to their plans. And then there's days where they just don't. I can't really I'm not part of the organization. I can't really
Sure.
put my finger on what's going on. But even in scrims, there's like days where I just show up and like they run the course with us and days where it's the opposite. So it's kind of hard to put a finger on why that's happening to them. Maybe the style of which they played and the style of which they had success just isn't the way to play anymore for them. One of the things I will say though is like, basically this is every Call of Duty game in the history of, even when I competed, like the start of the year, there's a clear 2, 3, 4 teams at most that kind of stick out because they're the players that have understood what they need to accomplish on the map. And then people kind of slowly catch up as the year goes on. Then towards the end of the year, the last few events, you have like 6, 7, 8 teams that can actually compete and win the tournament, which is why the end season is so explosive and so entertaining to watch. And it's one of the reasons why you've seen teams win champs that you would have been like, why is this team winning champs? Like, I'll just like, for example, EG from World War II, like team came out of nowhere, like didn't have a great season, but just like showed up. And then it's realized at a point where like there's not really kind of a high difference. Like the meta, like, or not meta, but like the understanding of how to play the game kind of slowly increasing. The skill is more or less similar for like, especially right now in the Pro League where we have like 60 players, 60 best players in the world competing. The skill gap isn't high enough. It's really more like the decision making and the understanding what they need to accomplish on the map that's going to be the difference. And now because that skill, that kind of understanding gap is closing, you see a lot more teams come out and have a chance to win these matches, even against the top teams that you expect to be not able to lose, like Toronto against FaZe. You say Toronto against FaZe 3 months ago, that's a hard 3-0 for FaZe, but now it's like it's a whole new kind of part of the season we approach, and it's kind of typical for esports.
Is that more difficult for you as a coach, or do you welcome the challenge?
Not really. It's a little, it's not worrisome because it feels like some of the advantages you had that you could rely on earlier in the season aren't necessarily advantages anymore because the things most people know by now. But it's really more about like, it gets to a point where it's who's going to play best on the day. For me as a coach, it's really important to just make sure my team's prepared to put themselves in a position where they can win maps based on their skill and the kind of the heights of their weapon play through the games. It's not so much decisions now. It's more about like kind of playing well on the day of and making sure that when you have a chance to accumulate time on hardpoint and win rounds in search, that you don't make small mistakes that'll cost you rounds. So I know I feel like the skill of my team is, I've always preached the skill of my team is one of the highest, if not the highest in the league. So to me, it's something that's actually going to help us as the year goes on.
Tell me about this week. I'm sure a lot of teams were hoping to scrim with you going into this weekend since you weren't part of the weekend. Which teams looked good going into the weekend?
New York, again, New York's been, again, this is one of the weird things we deal with this year. We've been having issues with our practice regimen so we're competing on 60 hertz servers. Everyone knows that. We have the opportunity to scrim on, like, we have dedicated hosts, but those are 12 hertz servers. And then we have the ability to scrim on the GB platform, which are 60 hertz servers. But there's a thought that the spawns are different on that kind of platform for whatever reason. A lot of players feel that way, and a lot of examples we've seen kind of emulate that mentality. So it's difficult for us to really kind of get a good feel on what we're gonna like. Example, like when you're asking a question, what team looked good? We didn't really practice any teams in the kind of the competitive environment that we're gonna see that we saw this week. So it's hard. The teams that played well this weekend look good. Like Chicago actually looked. We started scrimming Chicago in like I think 2 weeks ago, and they've been looking really good. So I was no surprise. Honestly, I thought they were going to win the event this weekend. FaZe just, again, you can't really vote against FaZe, so I felt like FaZe going to play well. But again, New York and Toronto have been really good teams for at least a month and a half, 2 months. So it's no surprise to what happened.
So I heard this last week when we were talking with Saint from the Rocker. He said the exact same thing about the practice scenario. What would the solution to that be?
It'd be the solution is not an easy one, but like honestly, it'd be if the CDL offered the servers that they use for tournaments for us to practice on, would be the best case scenario, because then it's like professional sports teams get to practice on their arenas or their football fields that they play on. So it's like there's obviously just a little different than what we're experiencing now, but it's still like this is what I'm competing on. I know what to expect, right? So the differences that we see in gameplay wouldn't be different. Not saying it's huge. It doesn't make that. It makes a difference, but not a huge difference. But yeah, it's to the point where that would be the best case scenario, is that whatever we're competing on, we can practice, which typically has never been a problem in the past. It's just kind of we're dealing with certain issues this year with the game that we have.
And certainly, I mean, there's a lot of issues in terms of the league being online, things that nobody can control really, right?
No,
Like there's a lot
right.
of, let me ask this. I mean, now that we know that champs will be online, I mean, I think this was a foregone conclusion for many people, given what's
100%.
happening in the world, right?
It's been months.
How do you look at, I mean, but now that it's official, now that it's here, it's staring us in the face, like, how do you think you'll look back on this season?
I mean, it's not any different. Like granted, online play is always going to bring certain advantages to certain teams. There's no way around that. Like as good as the CDL, like CDL is doing a good job of trying to provide the best server locations and make it as competitively fair as possible to all the teams. There's things that possibly could be done to make it a little better, but it really like there's never going to be a point where we're on even footing with every team. That's just impossible. Unless all the players are in the same location, but then I mean that provides other issues. So yeah, no, it's weird. I don't think I'll be looking back on this year as like any different as I would any other year. Like it's online and like people just like, oh, put an asterisk on champs this year, like so on and so forth. No, dude, we're still competing. There's a large amount of money. We're still competing on the game. Granted, some teams have small advantage, but it's not enough to really say like I can't beat this team. It's impossible. And honestly, it's not. It shouldn't be in any of our jobs, any of our minds to really think of it that way. We're here to compete. We're here to do the best we can, and that's what we're paid to do. So that's what we're going to try and accomplish for the rest of the year.
Let's focus on your team now. Your last two semifinal matchups, back-to-back tournaments, very close, 5-game affairs. One thing I noticed was, well, the first one against Florida went to a map 11, right? Like it was round like 11, down to the round 11, down to the wire. Just unfortunate there. Another 5-game series, the next tournament. Mm-hmm. One thing I noticed was game 1 always seems to be like a slow start for Dallas. Like it was like in those games, in those semifinal games, it's like round 1 game number 1 is like a 250 to 160 loss on hard point or something, right? But then Dallas seems to get back into it. It's almost like when a boxer says, "I'm not truly in the fight until I get punched in the face once," or something like that, right? Like, how do you, how do you assess that as coach when you see this pattern emerging?
It's hard. Like, there's always tendencies on certain players and how they interact to certain situations, and some people, like kind of what you said, like some boxers need to get hit in the face to kind of step up and be like, "Oh, this is real now." And it's not easy. Like it's honestly, it's not like it's a consistent scheme like we've seen all year. Like we've had matches that we just start on fire and there's some we don't. And that's just kind of like, I mean, you look at every team in the league, there's differences. There's not that big of a difference between each team. Like a lot of teams, typically what you see the most is a team that starts hot will finish hot, will like be able to close out a series quickly. What you don't see very often is a team that's doing what we can do, is basically lose early and then be able to bounce back and turn the match around on its head and still have a chance to win. And it's hard because looking back on, like, when you lose a game 5 to the teams that end up winning events, like, it's just like, sure, we lost and it was really close. But again, like, we're at a point in the year where those kind of matches are going to be more probable because the differences in team to team is just not as much as it was before. So it's just really hard to kind of be confident about winning every match 3-0 or feeling like you're literally going to win. And then there's also the coin toss elements that can kind of answer your question a little bit. If you lose a coin toss and you typically start if you win or lose a coin toss, it can typically put you in a bad situation to start a match. And if you, for example, like the Florida series, we just started off really soft the first 2 hills. We lost by what, like was it 80, 90 points? But we were basically down by 80, 90 points after like a hill or 2 or 3 hills. So it's just, there's so many variables that kind of go into it that I personally don't really like looking at it. I feel like it's just a matter of like, the guys just need to be hot on the day. And if we have a good first match, then so be it. If we have a bad first match, then we're able to bounce back. And that's more what I would be worried about. If we get crammed the first game and then we're just lost and we don't even play for to win after, like, I'm play for to win, but like, it's a bad example. But let's say the guys are just not into it and they're like, oh, they're frail and they're scared. But that's definitely not the case. Like, our guys have fire, and losing actually, if anything, turns their head on the swivel and really gets them going. So yeah, it's just hard.
This weekend, no Atlanta, no Chicago, but you got Florida and you have the Subliners. So it's almost like Dallas versus the new guard in a way, right? Or the new contenders, so to speak. Right. Are you looking forward to that? Do you like the idea that Dallas is in a tournament like this without teams like Atlanta and Chicago in it? Or are you someone who says, you know what, I'd rather have every good team in a tournament?
I mean, to me, it doesn't matter. Like, as a coach, what I look for is really us playing our best. And if we do that, I feel like we can beat any team in the league in any day, regardless of who it is and what time it is. From a scheduling standpoint, it kind of sucks for us because like if you look at the start of the year, you would like, and you, let's say this event happened 3 months ago, or these teams haven't really caught up and aren't really kind of uput, then like you would look at it as this is going to be a breeze for us because we were basically far ahead as the other team. But because it happened so late in the season, now it's like you have those discussions, right? Like Florida won 2 in a row and then New York won the last one. So like we have the last 3 event winners in our tournament. And you're like talking about FaZe in Atlanta, or excuse me, FaZe in Chicago, but they haven't won recently. So like to us, that's like, these aren't the guys we need to beat anymore. These are the guys that beat our event. So kind of flip that question on your shoulders there. It's
sure.
The guys, I mean, again, we're trying to beat everyone. And if we want to win the biggest event of the year, which is the last event, and give ourselves the best chance to do it, we need to perform well the next 2 weekends because it'll give us the best seeding going into that tournament. So that's really all that's on our minds, is really perform the best we can leading into champs and kind of come out hot.
You know, that's a really good point. Like, look, if you look at this tournament, let's say even 2 months ago, right? You would just be throwing up like router memes online immediately. Dallas, like, this is the most chalk tournament. Dallas winning immediately. Like, nobody's predicting. That's a very good point, because as early as what, like maybe 2 months ago, like none of these teams would have had good standings or good results in any tournament, right?
I mean, that's just the way it goes, right? Like this is like
Incredible.
an end sport, really. Like it always happens this way, where because you have certain matchups at certain time of year and certain players do well at certain times of year, it's just the way it goes. Like we just ended up playing FaZe and in Chicago a ton in the early of the year, where they were the kind of the teams to beat. And then as the year goes on, we didn't play them as much, and now we're playing different teams that kind of caught up. But hey, look, we're looking forward to the challenge. It's not even near an excuse in our heads. It's just we want to perform the best we can. If we feel like we do that, we feel like we can win any event.
So take me, I know like a logistics question for you. Take me in. So now you have 2 back-to-back tournaments on back-to-back weekends. Does your schedule change? Does prep change? Like what changes about having this condensed of a schedule versus when you have more time on your hands?
So this is kind of an interesting question, a good one at that. I'll kind of take you back to our last 2 events, because our last 2 events were back-to-back weekends. They weren't scheduled to be back-to-back weekends because of what was going on with the world at the time. They postponed an event to a week later. So instead of having a week off, we had to play back-to-back weekends, which can really be one of 2 ways. It's really your team's hot and they're playing well and you're having a chance to win, or your team's not very hot and you don't really have time to kind of bounce back. Like, sure, we have a few days in between events, but because if we have like a good first event, then it's immediately going to catapult us to have an extreme amount of confidence for the next event, and then vice versa on the first event. Like it's kind of schedule kind of helps in that way, because we're playing teams that we feel comfortable playing against in the first weekend. For the most part. So we feel like we have a good chance to kind of make it deep into the tournament, if not win it, obviously. And then the second weekend, you look at like the teams in it, like all the kind of most of the top teams are in it, like Florida. Maybe New York's not in that one. Yeah, I think New York's done after this weekend, but we have Florida, FaZe, and Chicago. Right. So like 3 of the other 4 teams that are really kind of showing up this year. So, so yeah, no, it's really, to me, I like it because it really keeps your team on a roll. And there's always this kind of sense of, practicing isn't like competing, and you kind of need to practice competing to really get the gist of really the feeling you need to have to perform at a high level. So for example, last time we didn't have that hot of a start the first of 2 events, because we had literally like 7 weeks off before we competed the first of 2 weekends back to back. So now we've only had like 4 weeks, I think. So at least now we kind of still have a feeling for it. And once we get into it, then we can keep the ball rolling and then really kind of do the best we can to really kind of, again, close out the year strong, because it's kind of what we need right now.
How much time do you give off to yourself, to your players, when you have that much of a stretch off? Like, is it important to take time off, or is it important to say, you know what, let's just get some reps in at some point? Like, how do you manage that?
So me personally, I feel like it's more of an emotional and kind of mental state. Like I mean, look at esports, like playing video games isn't really tiring from a physical standpoint. To a certain extent, like sitting around kind of gets tiring, but it's more the mental aspect. Like if I feel like my guys are kind of getting frustrated with certain things and just aren't really kind of output, like or if we feel like we're playing well and we don't really want to overthink things, then it's kind of nice to take a day or 2 off and really feel that way. Like our last week of scrims went really, really well. And the guys were like, let's watch this weekend. Let's see how things go. Our focus was more on watching than playing. So we took a few days off to really kind of make sure that what we're practicing is what we're going to expect in the tournament. And yeah, like the guys are going to be fresh coming in, like we're scrimming today at 12 and we're going to be scrimming all week, and probably this is a point where we're probably not going to take that many days off for the next month and a half because of 2 events and then champs kind of leading into it. So, but yeah, typically like in the middle of the year, like I like at least taking 1 day a week off depending on what's coming up. And then if we want to have like a high ramp schedule leading tournament, then we'll probably take a day or two off before we start that, because leading up to the tournaments, typically we like playing 3 scrims a day, which is like 8-9 hours sometimes. So it's kind of a long day, especially when you're having that like 4 or 5 days in a row. But yeah, it's really kind of judging it based on how the kind of current momentum of the team is and how everyone's feeling, and trying to make the best practice we can. It's important, and I feel like every coach is probably going to tell you this, but you have to know your team, right? Like it's important to know how your players react to certain things, and how they can really get to the best performance they can. And if you're scrimming and there's nothing really being accomplished, then you're scrimming for nothing. So at that point, there's not even a point.
You have a lot of passionate people on your team. I imagine there's some workaholics in there. Like, how do your players react to being asked to take a day or two off?
I don't like it. I think Clay and me are probably the only guys who are like, yeah, all right, let's relax today.
Take a moment, right?
Yeah,
it's actually funny, exactly what you're mentioning. So Wiz Khalifa tweeted today, of all people, he said, gaming is tiring and a lot of work. Much respect to the people at home putting those hours in. So even he understands the grind of playing. It's kind of funny. I know this is like totally a tangent, but like the idea of people who make opinions of video game as work. Oh, look at you, you're playing video games for a living, but you don't understand that when you put that many hours in, it's not fun. Like you're not playing for fun anymore. So like that dopamine drip of playing it because it's a novelty goes away, right? So now it's worth the amount of hours.
Like for example, like, I mean, for me personally, when I compete, and I feel like I probably speak for a lot of players, if not most of the players, it's really the point where what you enjoy is the competitive aspect of the game, not necessarily the game itself anymore. So like if you play a game you don't typically enjoy that much, you still get a kind of kick from it because of the fact that you're competing, you're trying to get better at something. And that's really what you need to focus on when you're playing, because I mean, Call of Duty doesn't really change that much, especially for guys that have been playing for as long as like I started. For example, Crim and Clay have been playing for like 9-10 years now. Like that's a long time of playing kind of a game that hasn't changed that much. So like you would be very surprised to see those guys go play public matches and enjoy it at this time of year.
Sure.
It's just not a thing. So for us, it's really the basis of like, let's get better. Let's feel like we're putting our time to use, and really it's like it's almost like chess at that point. The enjoyments you have are really of getting better at something at your craft.
I haven't had a chance to talk to Crim very much, so I haven't asked him this, but like what motivates him at this point? Is it just the thrill of competition? Like someone who's done so much, right? Like how does he continue to find the desire to win when he's already won so much?
Winning never gets old, dude. It just doesn't. It really doesn't. And I'm a competitive freak. I compete in many things besides video games, and that feeling you get when you kind of reach the goal that you've tried to accomplish is just it feels so rewarding. And I feel like at that point, that's probably, I mean, you'd have to ask him for yourself, but I would assume that's what drives him the most. Really the mentality of just kind of like establishing himself as still a competitor, still proving it out every day that he has it. And he's been proving out this year. He's had a great year so far. So yeah, no, the competitive, the kind of what you explained, the dopamine, like the adrenaline rushes you get from competing, and that height of momentum and emotion you have is just unmatched. So a lot of players just don't want to lose that feeling. So that's not finding their drive to compete. To me, has never been an issue. Even I, who don't compete anymore, still could have the drive to compete. It's more putting in the hours in. That's really the difficult part, I think, for those guys.
I remember you telling me the last time we spoke that you found like was it a new kind of thrill or maybe a different thrill in coaching people to victory as opposed to when you were playing yourself?
So, I mean, I still find it, like, to me, it's like figuring out things and putting into play was kind of one of my favorite things when I competed, was like helping my players get better and helping my team get better. And the feeling of reward of seeing the things that we're doing are actually the right things and accomplishing, and that feeling of success based on what we've learned and what we thought is kind of what drives me as a coach. So, I mean, that's kind of one of the things, like seeing us win, but seeing us win in a way where we felt like we worked as a team and really accomplishing those goals, to me is like super exciting.
So you will be you meaning the Dallas Empire, will be participating in the next two events back to back, the London home series on July 17th to 19th, the Toronto home series on July 24th, 26th. I'm still not clear on what home series advantage is at this point. I don't know. Is there any at all? Does the home team get any sort of provision or anything at all other than the home series having their name on it?
You get to wear the same jersey color all weekend.
That's it?
Yeah, basically.
That's basically it? Great.
I mean, I don't know what kind of advantage you really want to give him. Like, if you want to go crazy, you could have been like, oh, yeah, let's give them the server connections. Let's give them hosts.
That wouldn't have pissed off anyone.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know what kind of advantages you want to see, but that's kind of the basis of it, right? Like, there's not much you can do to really give an advantage. Like typically, like the home series events would have been you're playing on your turf, and like
Sure.
like the event we went to LA, there was a lot of Optic and Gorilla fans, I guess, because that's their hometown. People want to have the home city pride, and you saw it in Minnesota as well. So I guess that was like the basis of it, and that's what it should be. But it's obviously playing online. There's not much to it, so it's just more like the advantage to get to represent your personal team sponsors a little more, and so on and so forth. And then again, you get to wear the same color jersey, and beyond that, that's about it, I think.
So my last question is, Dallas is still fourth in the standings, so still in that top half, lucrative spot, still within striking distance of at least getting to second, possibly if not first, with some great tournament results here, right? So how do you approach these last two tournaments? Is winning paramount, or is collecting? I mean, they go hand in hand, but what are you looking at more and prioritizing more? Is it the standings to get into champs, or are you looking at it one tournament at a time and we want to win?
From a bystander fan empire fanboy standpoint, I'm looking at the standings, I guess you can say. I mean, I think we're guaranteed top four at this point. I don't think anyone can. I think New York's like 60 points behind, and let's say we got 0 points the rest of the year, then they win the next event, they would only get 50. So I don't think anyone can catch us as far as like the top four is concerned. So I mean, again, the basis of it is to get a top two seeds going to a champ, so you have that extra bye. That's really the main thing that everyone's playing forward to from this point on, is to maintain that seeding going to the last event, the biggest event of the year. And it's a huge advantage, right? Like to only have to win or is it 3 series? So semis winners of 3, basically win 3 series to win champs. This is a huge advantage compared to 4. And it's, again, like I explained earlier, where a lot of teams are kind of catching their stride now, where there's not just like at the start of the year, you're like, oh, the top, like, oh, it's not a big deal if I'm the 3rd seed because I'm playing 4th, 5th team or whatever in the first round of my tournament, and I'm going to beat those guys. But now, like, there is 5 or 6 teams in this tournament that could easily win this event going into the last few events of the year, including champs. So that seeding element is a huge aspect of what we're looking at. So, but again, like as a coach, I'm not really caring about results. I'm just really more worried about my team being as prepared as they can to give ourselves the best chance to win these tournaments, just take it a match at a time. It's really all we can do.
All right. Well, as I mentioned, 2 back-to-back consecutive weekends